She said, if you really loved me, you'd put my name on the house deed, so I told her to pack her bags. Later, she came back with a lawyer, claiming she had rights to my house, acting shocked, playing victim, and demanding what was never hers. And I learned love should never come with threats ever. She looked me dead in the eye, right there in the kitchen I'd built with my own hands, and said, if you actually loved me, you'd add my name to this $750,000 house deed. My world shattered in that moment, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly felt deafening, and the smell of the dinner I'd just cooked evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. This story, though, doesn't start with that stark moment of manipulation. It actually begins much earlier, with a lesson my dad taught me when I was just 19 and had just gotten my electrician's apprentice license. My father had been an electrician for 32 years, working on everything from residential wiring to commercial high-rises. And the one thing he absolutely hammered into my head wasn't about voltage or circuit breakers. It was about protection. One night, after a brutal 12-hour shift, he told me that the most important thing a man can do is protect what he builds. Not just with insurance or contracts, he explained, but with documentation, clear boundaries, and smart decisions. He even showed me his filing cabinet, full of permits, receipts, photos of every major job, every license renewal, every single piece of paper that proved he'd earned what he had. I didn't fully grasp it back then, but boy, do I now. My name is David, I'm 34. I've been working as an electrician since I was 19, just like my dad. I started as an apprentice, pulling wire through scorching hot attics in 100-degree heat, making $12 an hour, learning the trade from guys who'd been at it longer than I'd been alive. I earned my journeyman license at 23, my master electrician license at 27. And by the time I hit 30, I'd saved enough to launch my own electrical contracting business. That wasn't luck, it wasn't a handout. It was 6 years of living in a cramped apartment, driving a 15-year-old beat-up truck, and pouring every single extra dollar into my business account. Now, I have 8 guys working for me, including my foreman, Chris, who's been with me from day one. We've got steady contracts with 3 property management companies, and a reputation that keeps my phone ringing even during slow seasons. 6 years ago, when I was 28, I bought my house. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style place in a good neighborhood. It definitely needed work, but it had good bones. I got it for $420,000. I put down $84,000, literally every penny I had saved, and then spent the next 2 years fixing it up myself. I rewired half the house to code, updated the breaker panel, installed new lighting fixtures in every room, refinished the hardwood floors, painted inside and out, and landscaped the front yard. Every single upgrade, every permit, every receipt. I meticulously kept them all in a folder, exactly like my dad taught me. Last year, the house appraised at $750,000. That means I'd built $330,000 in equity through my own sweat and smart investing. That house wasn't just property, it was proof that I knew what I was doing with my life. I met Chloe about 2.5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was 29, worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, drove a leased BMW, and had that kind of magnetic confidence that makes you pay attention when she walks into a room. We hit it off, started dating, and for the first 6 months, everything felt normal. She had her own 1-bedroom apartment across town, which she rented for about $1,400 a month, and we'd split time between her place and mine. But gradually, almost without me even noticing, she started spending more nights at my house. First, it was just weekends, then it became 3 or 4 nights a week. Then, clothes started appearing in my closet, toiletries in my bathroom, food in my fridge. I honestly didn't mind at first, I liked having her around. Plus, my house definitely had more space and was in a better neighborhood than her apartment. About 8 months into our relationship, she mentioned that her lease was coming up for renewal, and her landlord was raising the rent to $1,650 a month. She didn't directly ask to move in, she just kind of sighed and said, "I hate throwing away money on rent when I'm basically living at your place anyway." And I made the mistake of saying she could stay at my house while she figured things out. That was the first big red flag I completely missed. She never signed a lease, never paid rent, never contributed to the mortgage or property taxes. Sure, she'd buy groceries sometimes, and she'd pay for dinners out, but there was never any formal arrangement about her living in my house. Looking back, I should have set clear boundaries right then. I should have either asked her to contribute financially or kept things casual, but I didn't, because I genuinely thought we were building something special together. Then she met Brianna. Brianna was a friend Chloe made at some networking event for pharmaceutical reps, and from the moment Brianna entered the picture, things really started to shift. Brianna was the kind of person who had an opinion about everyone's relationship. She was always talking about what her boyfriend did for her, what her friends' boyfriends should be doing, what expectations were reasonable in modern relationships. Chloe started coming home from lunches with Brianna and casually dropping comments like, "Brianna's boyfriend just added her to his condo title because he wanted her to feel secure." Or, "Did you know in some states, if you live together long enough, you're basically entitled to half of everything?" I'd laugh it off or try to change the subject, but the comments kept coming. She even started sending me articles about cohabitation rights, about how couples who live together should share assets, about what it means to be a true partner. I'd read them, nod, and move on, thinking she was just brainstorming out loud. But then, about 4 months ago, one night after I'd made grilled chicken and vegetables, she brought it up directly. "I've been thinking," she said, "we've been together for over 2 years now. I live here. We're building a life together, and it feels weird that this house is only in your name." I put my fork down, a knot forming in my stomach, and asked her what she meant. "I think you should add me to the deed," she stated. "Make me a co-owner so it actually feels like our home, and not just your house that I'm staying in." I managed to stay calm, which I'm still proud of. I explained the situation logically. I told her I bought this house 6 years ago, for years before we even met, with my own money that I'd saved for years. I explained that I'd put in the sweat equity, done most of the renovations myself, and that the increase in value was purely because of my work and my investment. I told her I cared about her, loved having her there, but adding her to the deed would mean giving her legal ownership of an asset she hadn't contributed to, and that just didn't make any sense to me. She didn't yell, but her face changed. It got cold. "So, you're saying you don't see a future with me?" she said. I told her that wasn't what I was saying at all. I was just being realistic about property and finances. Then she hit me with the line I'll never forget. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "If you actually loved me, you'd add my name to the $750,000 house deed." The way she said it, with that entitled tone, like my hard work was somehow conditional on proving my feelings, made something click in my brain. I looked at her and realized this wasn't about love anymore. This was about control and ownership of something she hadn't earned. I told her, no, I wasn't adding her to the deed, and if that was a problem for her, we needed to talk about what this relationship actually was. She stood up from the table, grabbed her purse, and said, "I need to think about whether I want a future with someone who doesn't treat me like an equal partner." Then she walked out the door. She didn't come back that night, didn't answer my texts. I sat in my house wondering if I'd just dodged a bullet or lost someone I genuinely cared about. Chloe returned 3 days later like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She didn't apologize, didn't explain where she'd been. She just walked in with her key, unpacked her overnight bag, and started acting like we were roommates instead of a couple. The warmth was gone, replaced by this cold, transactional energy that made my own house feel utterly uncomfortable. She stopped cooking, stopped asking about my day, stopped doing any of the little things that made it feel like we were building something together. I'd come home after a 10-hour day running wire through a commercial building downtown, and she'd be on the couch scrolling her phone, wouldn't even look up. I'd ask if she wanted to grab dinner, and she'd say, "I already ate," in this clipped tone that made it perfectly clear she wasn't interested in spending time with me. The worst part was how she started weaponizing the house itself. She'd make comments like, "I'm just staying in your house, so I guess I should act like a guest," or, "It's your property. You make the rules," with this passive-aggressive edge that was clearly meant to make me feel guilty. I tried to ignore it, focused on work, tried to give her space to process whatever she was dealing with. But it became obvious pretty quickly that this wasn't about processing. This was about punishment. She was punishing me for not giving her what she wanted. I started to seriously wonder if I even knew who this person was. About 2 weeks after she came back, I started noticing she was texting more than usual. She'd be smiling at her phone, typing long messages, and when I'd walk into the room, she'd tilt the screen away or put it face down on the table. I'm not the jealous type, never have been, but something just felt off. She started going out more, saying she had work dinners or was meeting Brianna, coming home at 10 or 11 at night smelling like wine and making excuses about traffic or long meetings. I didn't confront her because I didn't have proof of anything. And honestly, part of me thought maybe she was just creating distance because we were going through a rough patch. Then, one Thursday afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was supposed to be at a job site in the north part of town until 6, but the project got delayed because the building inspector didn't show up. My foreman, Chris, told the crew to pack it up early. I got home around 3:30, which was really unusual for me. And I immediately noticed Chloe's car in the driveway, which was also weird because she was supposed to be working. I walked up to the front door, unlocked it quietly. I wasn't trying to sneak around, I just didn't think to announce myself. The moment I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from upstairs, from my bedroom. One of them was definitely male. I stood in the entryway for maybe 5 seconds, just processing what I was hearing. And then I walked upstairs. I didn't run, didn't yell, just walked up slowly while my brain tried to catch up with what was happening. I pushed open the bedroom door, my bedroom door, in the house I'd bought with my own money. And there she was, in my bed, with some guy I'd never seen before. They both froze. She screamed. He scrambled for his clothes. And I just stood there feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. The guy, Jason, grabbed his pants and shirt and practically ran past me down the stairs. Didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. He just bolted out the front door like the house was on fire. Chloe pulled the sheet up around herself, and I waited for her to say something, anything that made sense. But instead, she went on the offensive. She said, maybe if you treated me like an actual partner instead of a tenant, I wouldn't have to look for affection somewhere else. I swear I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her to get out. And she had the nerve to laugh, actually laugh, and say, this is my home, too. You can't just kick me out. I walked over to the closet, pulled out her suitcase, threw it on the bed, and told her she had 30 minutes to pack whatever she could carry because I was changing the locks tonight. She tried the guilt trip first, saying I was overreacting, that it didn't mean anything, that she'd made a mistake because she felt insecure about our relationship. When that didn't work, she switched to anger, yelling that she had rights, that she'd been living here for over a year, that I couldn't just throw her out without notice. I stayed calm, which seemed to make her even angrier. I explained very clearly that she'd never signed a lease, never paid rent, never contributed to the mortgage or property taxes, and legally, she was a guest in my home, not a tenant. She screamed that she'd call the police. I told her to go right ahead, because I had nothing to hide. She didn't call anyone. Instead, she packed 2 suitcases, the whole time muttering about how I was controlling and cold, and that she should have known better than to waste 2 years with someone like me. I didn't engage, didn't argue. I just watched her pack and waited by the door. Before she left, she turned around and said, you haven't heard the last of this. I have rights to this house whether you like it or not. And she slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The moment she was gone, I called my buddy Mark, a contractor I've worked with for years. I told him what happened. He came over within an hour with a new deadbolt and handle set, and we changed every lock on every door. I took photos of the house, documented that all her belongings were gone except for a few random items she'd left behind, and I put those items in a box by the garage. I texted her that her remaining stuff was available for pickup and that she needed to arrange a time with me to get it. No random showing up. She didn't respond. For about 2 weeks, I honestly thought that was the end of it, that she'd moved on and I could finally start rebuilding my life. Then I got a letter in the mail from a law office downtown, one of those thick envelopes with a firm's name embossed on the return address. I opened it and read the first line, which said Chloe was claiming she had an ownership interest in my property due to our cohabitation and her contributions to the household. I read it 3 times because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was actually trying to claim part of my house, the house I'd bought 4 years before I even met her, the house I'd renovated with my own hands and money. I immediately called the lawyer my dad had used for his business stuff, a guy named Daniel who'd been practicing real estate and contract law for 25 years. I sent him the letter, all my documentation about the house purchase, renovation receipts, permits, photos, everything. He reviewed it all and called me back the next day. He told me not to worry, that I was in a very strong position, that my state doesn't recognize common law marriage, and that Chloe's claim had almost no legal basis. He said she'd have to prove she contributed financially to the property or that we had some kind of explicit agreement about ownership. Since she couldn't prove either of those things, her case was essentially dead in the water. But he also warned me that she could still drag this out, file a nuisance lawsuit, and cost me time and money, even if she had no real chance of winning. I authorized him to respond to her lawyer, and he sent back a letter that basically said, "Bring it on. We have all the documentation, and you're wasting everyone's time." I figured that would be the end of it, that her lawyer would see the reality of the situation and advise her to drop it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Daniel called me and said, she's filing a civil suit. She's asking for $50,000 as compensation for her alleged contributions to the household and emotional damages. I felt my blood pressure spike for the first time in this whole mess. The civil suit took 4 months to wind its way through the system, 4 months of paperwork and depositions and stress that I absolutely didn't need while trying to run a business. Daniel kept reassuring me that we had an airtight case, but the anxiety of having someone try to take what you've built, even when you know they're wrong, that eats at you in ways I wasn't prepared for. Chloe's lawyer was clearly working on contingency, probably promised a cut if they won, and they were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. They claimed she contributed to household expenses, which was partially true in the sense that she bought groceries sometimes, but they couldn't provide receipts or bank statements showing any significant financial contribution. They claimed she'd done unpaid domestic labor that increased the property value, which was absurd because I'd done all the actual renovation work myself and had the permits to prove it. They even tried to argue that our relationship constituted a domestic partnership under state law, but Daniel shot that down immediately because my state requires explicit registration for domestic partnerships, and we'd never filed anything. The whole thing felt like watching someone try to build a house without a foundation, just stacking lies and half-truths and hoping it wouldn't collapse. The court date finally came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I showed up in a suit with Daniel, carrying a cardboard file box full of documentation that we probably didn't even need, but brought anyway, just to make a point. Chloe was there with her lawyer, wearing a black dress like she was going to a funeral, and she wouldn't even look at me. The hearing lasted maybe 45 minutes. Daniel presented our evidence, the purchase documents showing I'd bought the house 4 years before we met, the renovation receipts all in my name, the mortgage statements showing I'd been the sole payer for 6 years, the lack of any lease or cohabitation agreement, the photographs timestamped before and after renovations. Chloe's lawyer tried to argue emotional investment and contribution to household management, but the judge cut him off halfway through and said, "Counselor, I've reviewed the filings and I don't see any legal basis for your client's claim to property ownership or compensation." The judge dismissed the case right there, didn't even need to deliberate. And then came the part that actually felt like justice. Daniel had filed a motion for me to recover legal fees since the suit was frivolous. And the judge agreed. Chloe was ordered to pay $4,500 to cover my attorney costs. The look on her face when the judge announced that was something I'll never forget, just pure shock that her plan had backfired that badly. Walking out of that courthouse felt like stepping out of a thick fog I'd been living in for months. Daniel shook my hand, told me to focus on moving forward, and said if she tried anything else, to call him immediately. I went back to work that afternoon, showed up at a job site where we were installing a new electrical panel for a small office building, and just threw myself into the physical work because I desperately needed to feel normal again. But Chloe wasn't done trying to control the narrative. Within a week of the court ruling, she started posting on social media about how she'd been used and discarded, how she'd invested years into a relationship with someone who saw her as disposable, how she'd learned that some people only care about money and property. She never mentioned the lawsuit, never mentioned the incident, just played the victim to anyone who'd listen. I didn't respond at first because I figured people who knew me would know the truth. But then friends started sending me screenshots of her posts, and I realized she was doing actual damage to my reputation. So I made one post, just one, laying out the facts in the most neutral way possible. I explained that I'd bought my house years before we met, that she'd lived there without contributing to the mortgage or ownership, that the relationship ended when I discovered her infidelity, and that she'd filed a frivolous lawsuit that was dismissed by a judge with her being ordered to pay my legal fees. I didn't editorialize, didn't call her names, I just stated the timeline and the facts. The response was overwhelming. People I hadn't talked to in years reached out to say they'd suspected she was manipulating the story. Mutual friends apologized for believing her version, and her whole victim narrative fell apart within 48 hours. The karma didn't stop there. Through mutual connections, I found out more about Jason, the guy I caught her with. He worked with Chloe at the same pharmaceutical company, and it turned out he was married. His wife somehow found out about the affair, I'm guessing through someone at their workplace, and she filed for divorce within a month of everything going down. So Chloe's little escape plan had blown up in spectacular fashion because Jason wasn't leaving his wife for her, he was getting divorced because of her. I also heard that Chloe had to move back in with her parents after the lawsuit because she'd been spending money she didn't have on lawyers and lifestyle expenses. And the $4,500 judgment definitely didn't help her financial situation. Brianna, her friend who'd encouraged all the entitlement in the first place, apparently distanced herself once the lawsuit failed because she didn't want to be associated with someone who'd publicly lost that badly. I didn't take pleasure in any of that, exactly, but I won't lie and say it didn't feel like the universe was correcting itself. Meanwhile, my business kept growing because the drama hadn't touched my professional reputation at all. I landed 2 major contracts in December, one for a new apartment complex and another for a retail renovation, hired a 9th employee, and my accountant told me I'd had the best financial year since starting the company. The house felt peaceful again, like the energy had shifted back to something calm and positive. About 6 months after everything settled, I met Sophia at a Chamber of Commerce networking event that I normally wouldn't have gone to, but Mark dragged me along. She was a civil engineer, owned her own consulting firm, and we got talking about the challenges of running a small business in a competitive market. She mentioned she bought her own condo 3 years ago and had just finished paying off the renovation costs, and something about the way she talked about property ownership with pride, but not entitlement, made me really pay attention. We exchanged numbers, started getting coffee, and the difference between her and Chloe was like night and day. Sophia never asked about my house, never hinted that she expected access to my assets, never played games or tried to manipulate me into proving my feelings with financial gestures. When I eventually told her the whole story about Chloe, she just shook her head and said, "Some people see relationships as partnerships, and some see them as opportunities. You just have to know which one you're dealing with." One night, about 3 months into dating Sophia, I was having dinner with my dad and I told him everything that had happened, the whole saga from start to finish. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "Protecting your assets doesn't mean protecting yourself from happiness. It just means being smart about who you let into your life." And I realized that was the real lesson I needed to learn. I still live in this house, the one I poured my heart and soul into. And it's still just mine. Now, it feels less like a trophy, and more like a quiet foundation for everything good that's coming. Sitting on the deck I built, looking at the yard I landscaped, I think about how close I came to losing it all to someone who never truly valued what it took to create it. The peace I have now? It's priceless, and it's a direct result of standing my ground. What would you have done in my shoes?